Hello, welcome to Fred Dinage's Murder Casebook Reopened. I'm Hayley Rhodes. I'm here with Fred Dinenage. We're going to talk about a man described by one of the people in the programme as filthy but fastidious.
Christie was a monster that had been going for years and murdering girls left, right and centre.
John Reginald Christie, serial rapist, serial killer. One of the most dangerous psychopaths ever to roam the streets of London. Killed at least 8 people, including his own wife and a little baby, in a dreadful flat at an address 10 Rillington Place, Notting Hill in London. A really dreadful man, an absolutely appalling story of murder.
He really does seem to have been someone that got a real kick out of killing. There was no gain to all of these deaths. It really was just something that he did for his own gratification.
Yeah, a lot of it's sexual gratification as well, of course. A really dreadful man.
So to get to the bottom of how he turned out this way, why he turned out this way, you went right back to the start of his life. You met an author called Edward Marston who told you a little bit about Christie's childhood.
Yes, Edward Marston had done tremendous research into Christie and knew virtually everything about him.
He joined the Scouts and he sang in the choir. When he joined the Scouts, they gave him a rather nice uniform. And he wore it when he wasn't supposed to. He just loved the idea because it gave him definition. It gave him an authority. It gave him a kind of a role to play, if you like.
Born and brought up at Halifax in Yorkshire, the 6th of 7 children. They were mainly girls and they totally dominated Christie, which is probably why it affected his attitude towards women later in his life. Average sort of boy at school, very average. When he was in his teens, had consensual or attempted to have consensual sex with an older girl. He failed. In fact, he was impotent. And unfortunately for him, she told all her friends that he'd failed to have sex. And he became the subject of much mockery about his sexual prowess or his lack of sexual prowess. And this undoubtedly affected his attitude towards women later in his life and the way he treated women.
You interviewed Professor David Wilson, a criminologist, and he said that he thinks that combination of the domineering sisters plus the sexual embarrassment in his teens may really have shaped his relationship with women going forward.
Very definitely. He really, I think in a way, hated women and yet desperately wanted to have sex with women, but was really only capable of having proper sex with prostitutes, which kind of reflects his attitude towards women.
Which I think has quite a big and marked impact on Christie's development as a killer. He had impotence problems, certainly when he's dealing with a woman who can exercise her own power, the power that comes from her gender. And I think that has quite a big pattern on the way that Christie's going to behave later with those women that he kills.
It seems to have even been reflected in his own marriage. He married when he was 21 a woman called Ethel Waddington, and their relationship was described as being very much not a sexual relationship because he was, as you said, getting all of his kind of sexual activity elsewhere from sex workers.
Yes, I mean, Ethel apparently was a very plain, ordinary lady, but it suited him at the time. There was little, if any, sexual contact between them, but it was an arrangement that sort of worked for them. I think she turned a blind eye to his extramarital activities, as it were.
He got a job working for the post office, but he wasn't the best employee. He was jailed in the mid-1930s because he'd been forging postal orders to get money.
He was.
He separated from Ethel for a while, but in 1937 they reconciled and they moved to 10 Rillington Place in Notting Hill in London.
They did, yes, and to a what sounds to be a fairly dingy, awful flat at the top of 10 Rillington Place, which of course is where his murders were committed.
You spoke to a former police officer called Len Trevelyan, and he described that area to you, and he said it was an area that was rife with prostitution, which actually would have suited someone like Christie down to the ground. Rife
with prostitution. All of the flats in this road were absolutely multi-occupancy. They were really jam-packed. He visited 10 Rillington Place himself, and on one infamous occasion actually said to Christie, "There's an awful smell in this flat. There's an awful smell." And Christie managed to explain that away, but it just gave an indication of how ghastly these flats were. Since, of course, they've all been all been pulled down.
Can you describe to me Rillington Place, what it was like?
It was a little cul-de-sac with a brick wall right across the road at the end of 10 Rillington Place, and the houses there were all occupied multi-tenancies, 3 and 4 to a room.
So he moved with Ethel to this flat in 10 Rillington Place. He continued his old ways of frequenting sex workers. He and Ethel set up something of a side hustle, performing illegal abortions. So there were a lot of, Len Trevelyan told you that there were a lot of single women there who'd been widowed, for example, during the First World War. There was a lot of poverty, people turning to prostitution to make ends meet. And there was no birth control pill at that point in time, and abortions were illegal. So he and Ethel set up this cottage industry in their flat.
Totally illegal abortions they were carrying out. And in order to make the ladies comatose, if you like, he would gas them. But the gas he would use came from the cooker in the corner of the flat in Rillington Place. He would actually put a mask on their faces and gas them. And then he would have his way with various of these women and then strangle them.
So 1943, his wife had gone to Sheffield to visit her sister, and he had been having something of a regular liaison with an Austrian woman who was living in London, sometimes working as a prostitute, called Ruth Fürst. And one day, he gets a telegram to say that his wife is on her way home.
Yes, he got a telegram to say his wife's on the way home. He panicked about this, in actual fact, and strangled Ruth Fürst, and she was the first of his 8 victims.
So he strangled her, had sex with her body, by all accounts, according to him.
Yeah.
And then he shoved her under the floorboards for a while.
She was under the floorboards for a while before being buried in the back garden.
And you have to wonder how necessary that murder was, because there must have been... It was apparently because he was worried that his wife would find out what he'd been doing. But something tells me that Ethel wasn't completely oblivious to his activities anyway, if he was this prolific. So it seems like maybe it was more of a choice.
Yes, I think it was. And I suspect Ethel had a really good idea of what her husband was up to and what an unsavoury character he was. But I think she was, because of their little business on the side, their abortion business, I think she was overlooking an awful lot, to be quite honest.
So not long later, about a year or so later, he starts working at a company in Acton in West London, and he meets there a woman called Muriel Eady, and she has some health problems that he claims he can help with.
Yes, I think she had breathing problems, and again he said, "Oh, I can help you out." She met him in the flat in Rillington Place, and again, the gas mask put on her face. He's feeding her gas from the gas cooker, making her comatose, if you like. Again, having his way with her, and again strangling her.
So she then, along with Ruth, was buried in the garden, and all the time apparently his wife is oblivious to these goings on.
Allegedly so, yes. So there are now, when we say back garden, we're not talking about a big lawn here, we're talking about a really scruffy patch of ground. But yes, he'd now dug up 2 graves, if you like, and put bodies in them, and apparently not been seen, not being witnessed at all.
So shortly after this, a young couple moves into one of the flats in 10 Rillington Place, and these are Tim and Beryl Evans, and they are young, they're not very well off, they by all accounts are not they're not very well educated, so they're quite vulnerable people, they're quite a vulnerable couple.
Very vulnerable. Timothy Evans and his wife came from Wales. As you say, they weren't very well educated. He was a simple sort of man. They had a baby called Geraldine, and this is where their problems really started.
So not long after Geraldine was born, Ruth found herself pregnant again. And this was a real crisis for them because they weren't very well off. They didn't actually know how they were going to afford to pay for another child. And so Christie hears about this predicament that Ruth has found herself in and offers to help.
Yes, and again, it's the same sort of treatment. You know, Christie says, "Oh, I can solve this problem. You can have an abortion." The poor woman is taken to his flat, put in a chair. The gas mask again is inserted over her face, gas from the gas cooker. She becomes comatose. He has his way with her and kills her, strangles her.
So poor Tim Evans comes home from work at the end of that day to be told that Ruth has died during this procedure. And Christie says to him, there's no point going to the police, we can't tell anybody because this was an illegal procedure and you were complicit, you knew this was going to happen. So he finds himself with a dead wife and a newborn baby to look after.
Yes, so Evans has got a real predicament here. He doesn't know what to do. He's a simple man, so whatever Christie tells him, he will do. Christie's the answer to his problems, but he's lost his wife and he's got this young baby to look after and he doesn't know how to get out of it, doesn't know what to do.
So Christie offers him a solution, and that's that he claims that there's a couple from West London who can adopt Geraldine.
Yes, which was absolute nonsense, of course. And Geraldine was killed. Terrible.
I guess Tim doesn't know that this is what's happened to Geraldine. He flees, he goes back to Wales, and while he's there, he realises that he has to tell somebody about his wife's death, that he can't go any longer kind of holding the secret. So he goes into the police station in Merthyr Tydfil and tells them about what John Christie has done. He
does, and the police then go to 10 Rillington Place. But Christie, of course, he's very believable, you know, and he says, no, nothing to do with me. Timothy Evans murdered his wife and murdered the young baby as well. And the police believe Christie.
And there behind the woodpile, they actually find the bodies of Ruth and Geraldine.
Yes, they do. So the police go to 10 Rillington Place, and behind a woodpile in the yard, they find the body of Timothy Evans, his wife and baby. Extraordinary. And of course, it looks for all the world as if Evans is the guilty man.
And he's taken to the local police station in Notting Hill and interviewed again. And this time he confesses. He ends up saying that it was him, that he did kill Ruth and Geraldine.
Well, that's what the police certainly say, and they can produce a written confession from Timothy Evans admitting that he killed his wife and baby. And of course, Evans was convicted of this and hanged, although later, of course, it transpired that he wasn't guilty at all, and he was eventually cleared by the High Court.
So you spoke with forensic linguist Dr. John Olson for the programme, and he actually looked at the discrepancies between the statement that Timothy Evans had given when he first went to the police station in Merthyr Tydfil to report his wife's death and to point the finger at John Christie, and the one that was later taken in Notting Hill when he apparently confessed. And he said that with these words in the Notting Hill confession that he just never would have used as a simple man. He used words like incurred and squandering that just wouldn't have been within his vocabulary, and that it seemed very clear that this was a confession that had not come kind of candidly from his mouth.
Yes, I mean, in our murder casebook programme all those years ago, the linguistics experts analysed the statement that Timothy Evans was alleged to have made to the police. And he discovered words and expressions in there that Evans, as a simple, poorly educated man, simply wouldn't have used. He wouldn't have spoken like that, which would sort of indicate that the statement had almost been written for Timothy Evans and wasn't actually the words that he would have used in any event. You know, he's a simple man, easily led, you know, and was completely conned and deceived by Christie.
If you think of language as being something which is very formal at one end and very informal at the other, so at the higher end of this we would get what is called police register, and at the other end we would get what we would call very colloquial language. What we find in the Evans statements is a complete mix. But in the Merthyr Tydfil statements, we don't find a great deal of mixture of register. It is fairly faithful to the way that Evans probably would have spoken.
What about when we get to the statements made to the police at Notting Hill Police Station?
I think we have a completely different situation.
Can you illustrate that?
Yes, we can see that I've put a blue rectangle around the first sentence there, where it says, she was incurring one debt after another.
He wouldn't have said this is incurring.
Absolutely not. I mean, this is very high register language.
Yes.
And here we have, I would think, a number of examples of police-type language. We have squandering. I accused her of squandering the money.
Not a word Evans would ever have used.
I don't think so. No. I don't think so. It's a little bit like incurring.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it doesn't really belong there, I feel. And then that started a terrific argument in my house, but I can't see, a very ordinary chap from the valleys who's grown up in London, very little education, using a phrase like terrific argument. You know, we had a bloody row, is probably what he would have said.
So he gets away with these murders. He's living scot-free, but he and his wife Ethel start to have some marital problems.
They do, and I think in his own mind he decides that she's outlived her usefulness and it's time for his wife to go as well. So he murdered his own wife and buried her beneath the floorboards of the flat at 10 Rillington Place, which was in a way kind of symbolic, because Christie liked to walk across the floorboards to show that he was in charge. That he felt he'd been poorly treated by women, that women had looked down on him, and suddenly he could get his own back and he could walk on top of his wife at will, and she was buried beneath the floorboards at 10 Rillington Place.
So it was around this time that police officer Len Trevelyan actually had cause to visit the flats. There'd been a theft, I think, from a nearby flat. He was questioning people. So this was the point at which he came into 10 Rillington Place, into their flat, and said, "There's an awful smell here. What is going on? Why can't you get rid of this smell?"
Yes, and Christie actually said, well, it's nothing to do with me. There are so many immigrants living in these flats in Rillington Place, and it's what they cook and the way they cook, and it's all the fumes and the smells. This is what's causing the problem. And the policeman believed him.
Yeah, I think that he something didn't add up, but he didn't have a better explanation for it than that.
No, but the thing about Christie is what was a good cover for him is he'd become a sort of reserve policeman during the war years. So he was regarded by the police, or many in the police force, as one of them. He'd been one of them. He'd got this aura of respectability about him, and it also helped him in his dealings with ladies of the night, with prostitutes, because in exchange for their favours he wouldn't report them. So he got this. In fact, some people called him the Himmler of Rillington Place.
Yeah, because he was so fastidious and sort of such a job's worth.
Bossy and outrageous with everybody, but under the guise of this uniform, he was a policeman in his own mind.
So with his wife out the way, he is now free to sleep with as many sex workers as he wants and to kill as many people as he wants. So the next woman that kind of is lured into Rillington Place is a woman called Ruth Nelson. She works nearby at a tea shop. She finds herself pregnant and she comes to him for help.
Again, it's the same abortion technique. Oh, I can solve this problem for you. I'm going to give you some gas just to sort of nullify you, just to knock you out a little bit, and it'll be quite painless. So again, the mask is put on her face. The gas from the gas cooker is fed to her, knocks her out. He has his way with her, as he always did. He had sex with this comatose woman, which is the only way he could really have sex properly, and then strangled her.
And she was shoved into this little alcove in the kitchen, shoved into this cupboard.
Yes.
And not long later, another woman, Kathleen Maloney, is inebriated. She ends up in 10 Rillington Place, and the same fate.
The same fate befell her as well. And again, she finished up in this alcove in the kitchen behind some wallpaper that had been sort of dragged across it. Yes, the same fate befell her as well. Victim number 7.
So he's now got 2 victims in the garden. Yes. He's got his wife under the floorboards. He's got 2 in the cupboard. It's a complete house of horrors.
Yeah, and it's becoming madness. And I think by this time, Christie is probably going mad.
Well, it is that classic serial killer thing of starting slowly, and then as David Wilson, the criminologist, says, the intervals between the murders are getting shorter and shorter, and he's getting less organised in terms of his kind of methods.
Totally chaotic. He's killed all these women. He's killed this baby. He's even killed his own wife. His life is now completely shambolic and completely out of control. He's losing all touch with reality.
I think Ethel exercised some informal control over her husband's behaviour, and with Ethel out the way, hidden under the floorboards, the numbers of victims increase and the gap between victims narrows. Now, crucially, Fred, remember this kind of idea that the serial killer at the end of a killing cycle simply operates in a world that makes sense to that killer rather than makes sense in any cognitive way that you and I might recognise.
The next thing that happens in this story is that a young woman of Christie's acquaintance, Hectorina McLennan, needs somewhere to stay, and he says she can stay. Unbeknownst to him, she comes with a boyfriend in tow. They come and stay with him for 3 days, and then they plan to leave. He's not that pleased. Christie's not very pleased that the boyfriend is in tow, so it's not the most comfortable of environments. So after 3 days, they're going to leave, but before they can do that, Hectorina McLennan is killed.
She is killed. He murders her in exactly the same way. She became victim number 8. He just could not stop attempting to have sex with women and killing them.
So she again shoved into this alcove. This cupboard now has three bodies in it, which is remarkable. And he realises that things are closing in on him. It's only a matter of time before he gets caught. So he goes on the run.
He's on the run. He's kind of living rough, really. He's in a terrible state. His mind's all over the place. The flat is sublet to someone else, and the next person in starts to look around, move the wallpaper by the alcove, and that's when the bodies were discovered behind it.
I mean, absolute horror. They must already have moved into a flat that smelled awful, that was in
Yes.
disrepair. They must already have not felt like they'd landed in paradise. And then they start finding bodies. And when the police come, they're all found. There's the 3 in the alcove, the one under the floorboards, the 2 in the garden. And the police realise that the previous tenant, John Christie, was a serial killer.
Yes, this was 10 Rillington Place, truly the house of horrors. And then the search was on to find Christie before he can commit any more murders.
So 1953, he's drifting in London, he's living rough, and some police officers come across him on embankment by the Thames in London, and he gives them the name John Waddington, which is, of course, his wife's maiden name, Waddington, and they see through this very quickly, and they realise that this is the man they've been looking for.
Yes, and he's arrested immediately and confesses to the crimes.
He does, he confesses, but he doesn't take responsibility. He gives this kind of range of reasons why this has happened. You know, his wife was a mercy killing because she wasn't well. Some of the other women had attacked him and it was self-defence or an accident. So he's got excuses for all of them.
And none of which, of course, stood up. I mean, they were all absolute figments of his own imagination. The man was a psychopath, a very dangerous serial killer and serial rapist as well.
He does seem to have really become detached from the things that he'd done. He said a lot of times that he couldn't really remember. He might have done something. And then Dr. John Olson, the linguist, said that a lot of the language he uses in his statements is quite passive. It's like the scarf was not used in this murder rather than I did not use the scarf in this murder. So he's really separating himself from the crimes.
Yes, that's probably how he did speak. Although, again, the suggestion is that the police maybe possibly put words into his mouth as well. But certainly, I mean, he was living in a land of make-believe, wasn't he, by this time, Christie?
So it went to trial. He was charged with 4 murders, but for whatever reason, the laws at the time meant that he was actually only going to be tried for 1, which was his wife's murder.
Yes.
He went to trial and he did try to claim insanity.
He tried to claim insanity, as many serial killers, of course, do. He was tried for the murder of his wife and found guilty at court number 1 at the Old Bailey and sentenced to be hanged. You know, his plea that he was insane was completely and utterly, quite rightly, dismissed.
Despite his formal interviews, essentially kind of denying the murder element, giving all of these excuses why these women ended up dead, he ends up chatting with Len Trevelyan again, the police officer who had searched Rillington Place and noticed the smell, ended up being sent to chat with him, and he actually gives all the gory details to Len.
He does. He seemed to have this, Len Trevelyan seemed to have this ability to coax Christie into talking and giving all these facts and figures. I think it's partly because Christie could identify with him because of the police uniform, etc. I mean, Len, who on our programme all those years ago was a good age. I mean, he's in his 90s, I think.
Was he? Gosh.
But incredibly articulate and completely with it, and a really good talker. Had a nice, gentle manner about him, and I guess that would have helped as well with Christie. You know, get Christie into a decent frame of mind to talk about these things. And Christie seemed well able to talk to Len about what had happened, and he really spilled the beans. It was quite extraordinary, the detail he came out with. You know, it really was.
Yeah, and something that he had denied when he was giving his formal statements, but admitted to having sex with these women, with their bodies, essentially.
Yeah.
Which is something that can only have undermined his case when he went to court and claimed insanity.
And I think the fact that, you know, Leonard interviewed him and spoken to him in that flat in Rillington Place helped as well all that time before. That there'd been a rapport established between them, a certain trust between them, if you like, so that Christie felt able to talk to him and probably may have been quite relieved to have started to get this all off his chest, because it had become an absolute horror story. An absolute horror story. Killings that had got completely out of control.
I was called upon to sit in with him and chat to him, and he recognised me as being the person who had spoken to him some time before, you know, when I went to his house. So he was willing to chat. He was pleased to get it off his chest. And I did say to all these last three girls, they were pregnant. He said, I couldn't tell them that my wife was not there to do the abortion. He said, so I had to keep them quiet, and if they were dead, they couldn't talk about it. He said one, and then I hoped there would be no more, but then in due course there were two others came. He said, and I dealt with them the same way. He said, but I'm afraid each one of them I did indulge in sexual intercourse with them when they were dead.
So the trial was at the Old Bailey in June 1953, and it was a huge deal because sex murders. The press, the public love a sex murder. And so the trial was absolutely rammed, and he stuck with his defence of insanity.
He did, yeah. He tried to claim insanity. And perhaps in some ways he was insane. I think you'd have to be slightly insane to commit such appalling crimes, but it didn't wash, and he was sentenced to be hanged, which he duly was by the infamous Albert Pierpoint, of course.
So the mother of Tim Evans, who had been convicted of killing his baby and was believed to have killed his wife Ruth, the mother of Tim wrote to Christie in prison and said, please, could you now confess to killing the baby so that Tim can be exonerated? Because it must have been absolutely heartbreaking for her seeing her son convicted of this awful crime and hanged for it. And he refused. Christie refused to confess to killing Geraldine. He also withdrew his confession, retracted his confession for killing Ruth.
He did. Well, first of all, he retracted his confession for killing the baby because Christie never, ever admitted to killing the baby. And I think the reason for that was, if you're a sex offender and a serial killer, you'll be accepted by certain people in the prison. If you are a child killer, there'll be people in that prison, parents themselves probably, fathers themselves, who'll be looking out for you. And Bobby Cummins would have said that. You know, you'll be a marked man if you're a child killer in prison. So Christie, I think, again, looking after number one, looking after his own well-being, never, ever admitted to the killing of that little baby.
And then you spoke to Professor David Wilson about this and about this kind of the retracting his confession for killing Ruth as well. And this idea that many serial killers withhold certain amounts of information about what they've done, even when they're facing life in prison, even when they're facing the death penalty. They keep certain information to themselves because that gives them continuing power. You know, they had power while they were killing. That's been taken away when they've been arrested. But this withholding of information from people and that kind of continued distress that it causes gives them power.
Yeah, and you see that even with cases, very modern criminal cases. You see them withholding, serial killers, etc., withholding certain bits of information, where a body might have been buried, what happened to a certain person. They will hold that bit of information because that gives them the ultimate power, which is what they've always wanted power, and that's that final bit of power which they will not relinquish.
Serial killers that I've worked with never want to speak about those things. I think partly because it's the ultimate form of control. Often they've been seeking power and control in creating victims. That power and control is thus taken away from them after they've been arrested. So how do they then regain that sense of power and control? And what they do is they refuse to talk. They refuse to discuss anything whatsoever about the crime. It's the ultimate form of power and control they can exercise even after conviction.
So Tim Evans was only finally pardoned for the murder of his baby in 1966, and the conviction was never quashed. So as it stands, he's still officially the person who killed baby Geraldine.
And it was later described as a miscarriage of justice, but it was never, ever overturned, which seems desperately unfair.
It's really sad for him and for his family. And actually, that makes them just as much a victim of John Christie's actions as all of those women that he killed.
More victims of this terrible, terrible man, Christie.
It's interesting to wonder whether John Christie would have got away with his crimes today. I mean, none of his victims were even reported missing.
No, I think it's rather sad that they were the sort of, in the main, the sort of women that wouldn't be missed, that had probably left home years before, and nobody was going to miss them. Probably no one knew where they actually were. But no, it couldn't happen today, I'm sure, you know, in these days of the internet and mobile phones, etc., mass television coverage. I don't think John Reginald Christie would get away with it today. But nonetheless, 10 Rillington Place, the subject of books and an infamous film, the home of John Reginald Christie and the scene of some of the most diabolical crimes in British legal history.
Thankfully, the whole place has been torn down now.
Yes, it has, and quite rightly so. But the memory, sadly, lingers on.
It's been another really interesting case, Fred, so thank you very much. And we will see you next time for more of Fred Dinage's Murder Casebook Reopened.